Sentinel Protocol 21 miles. That is the width of the Strait of Hormuz at its narrowest point. Through this tiny choke point flows 20% of the world's oil, roughly 17 million barrels every single day. It is the most monitored, most contested, and most technologically congested piece of water on the planet. The United States Navy has surveillance satellites in geosynchronous orbit, passive sonar arrays buried in the seafloor, and billion-dollar phased radar systems that can track a seagull from 300 miles away. But in 2026, a declassified leak from Naval Special Warfare Command revealed something that upended the entire logic of modern military sensing technology. The elite units, the Navy SEALs, are supplementing their silicon arsenal with a sensor that is 10,000 years old. They are not looking for more processing power. They are not looking for a better algorithm written in a lab in Silicon Valley. They are looking at the biological night vision architecture of the domestic cat. To understand why, you have to understand what military strategists call the gray zone of the strait.
In these waters, the threat is almost never a massive destroyer on a radar screen.
It is the fast attack craft. Small, silent, extraordinarily low-profile boats that move in the dead of night, hidden by what naval commanders call the visual noise of the environment. The wave chop, the heat signatures of supertankers, the electromagnetic interference generated by a dozen competing naval communication systems operating simultaneously in a 21-mile corridor. Our digital sensors have a saturation point when the electromagnetic environment becomes sufficiently complex. And in the Strait of Hormuz, it always is, the sensors begin to fail in precisely the moments that matter most. Infrared gets confused by thermal gradients rising off warm water. Radar gets cluttered by commercial traffic and electronic countermeasures. And the human eye, operating through night vision equipment that amplifies photons into a grainy green approximation of reality, simply cannot resolve the difference between a fast-moving threat and floating debris at 800 meters in a 3-foot swell. But a cat's eye can. The biology of the feline eye. Feline's vision is not simply better than human vision in low light. It is architecturally different in ways that took 60 million years of predatory pressure to refine. The cat's eye is a biological masterpiece of what optical engineers now call photon capture, the maximum extraction of visual information from the absolute minimum available, light. Cats possess 6 to 8 times more rod cells in their retinas than humans. Rod cells are the photoreceptors responsible for low-light vision. In the human eye, cone cells, the daytime color receptors, outnumber and outposition them. The feline retina inverts this ratio dramatically. When the sun goes down and photon availability collapses, the cat's eye is only beginning to operate at its design specifications. Behind the retina sits the tapetum lucidum, a specialized reflective membrane, unique to cats and a small number of other nocturnal hunters. The tapetum functions as a biological mirror. Any photon that passes through the retina without being absorbed on the first pass is reflected directly back through the retinal tissue for a second attempt at capture. This effectively doubles the eye's sensitivity to available light. That characteristic eye shine visible in cats caught in headlights is not supernatural. It is physics. Light entering the eye, being captured, reflected, and captured again. The third and most operationally significant advantage is what biologists call the slit pupil. A cat's vertically oriented elliptical pupil can expand to cover 90% of the visible aperture in near total darkness, while allowing extraordinarily rapid constriction in bright light.
The engineering consequence is a dynamic range, the ability to function across extreme variations
in light intensity that no manufactured optical system currently matches. But the truly revolutionary insight is not the hardware. It is the software, the neural processing architecture of the feline visual cortex. The Sentinel Protocol in the Strait of Hormuz, the problem that defeated conventional thermal optics was not sensitivity. The sensors were sensitive. The problem was discrimination, distinguishing a meaningful signal from an overwhelming field of irrelevant data. During classified Operation Epic Fury exercises in the Persian Gulf, SEAL teams reported that standard thermal optics consistently struggled to distinguish between a small tactical drone and a seabird riding thermals above a warm tanker lane. The humid ionized Gulf air creates a thermal environment, so complex that even multispectral imaging systems were producing
false positive threat identifications at rates that made them operationally unreliable. The feline visual cortex solves this through what neuroscientists call motion-specific suppression, the ability to filter out environmental, static, and lock with precision onto what the brain classifies as mechanically rhythmic movement. A cat lying in tall grass does not see everything with equal attention. Its visual cortex actively suppresses the movement of grass in wind, random, aperiodic, environmentally generated, while simultaneously amplifying the detection of prey movement, which carries a distinctly different temporal signature, the heartbeat rhythm, the stride cycle, the mechanical regularity of an engine-driven propeller. This is the biological insight that produced the Sentinel Protocol by mapping the neural firing patterns of feline retinal cells during exposure to low-light maritime environments, recording how the cat's visual system responds to small engine-powered objects against complex wave-textured backgrounds. Researchers developed a bio-optic filter, an artificial intelligence processing layer that mimics the feline visual cortex's motion discrimination architecture and applies it in real time to conventional maritime sensor output. The Navy is not putting cats on boats. They are doing something more profound. They are extracting the computational logic of 60 million years of predatory evolution and encoding it into the next generation of combat optics. The cat's neural algorithm, its method of deciding what matters and what does not in a visually saturated environment, is being hard-coded into sensor systems operating on everything from SEAL headsets to autonomous maritime surveillance drones. They call it Bio-Mimicry. Military strategists are beginning to call it the new arms race, the convergence. The Sentinel Protocol represents a fundamental shift in how defense technology is being developed, away from the assumption that human engineering can always out-design biology, and toward a growing recognition that evolution, operating across timescales that dwarf the entire history of human civilization, has already solved many of the problems that trillion-dollar defense budgets are still struggling with. Why are we only hearing about this now? Because if the public understood that a 10-pound tabby possessed better target acquisition capability than a $100,000 drone sensor, the military-industrial complex would have a serious problem on its hands. But the SEALs do not care about public relations. They care about the Sentinel, the ability to see the threat in 21 miles of contested water before it sees them. As we move deeper into the bio-digital convergence of the 2030s, the Strait of Hormuz remains the world's most critical and contested maritime corridor. The nations that control the night in those waters will exercise an influence over global energy security that no diplomatic agreement can replicate. For now, the edge belongs to the country that looked away from its silicon fabrication plants and toward its domestic cats. That understood the 10-pound animal sitting on a couch in suburbia carries in its skull an optical processing system that cost nothing to develop, requires no external power source, and has never once produced a false positive in 60 million years of field testing. Your cat is not just sleeping on your couch. It is the blueprint for the most advanced maritime surveillance architecture in human history. Its visual cortex is currently being translated, line by neural line, into the combat optics of the most elite fighting force on Earth. The Sentinel Protocol is active, and in the dark, narrow waters of the Persian Gulf, in the 21 miles where the world's economy flows through every single night, the only sensor that never blinks, never saturates, and never fails is the one that evolution built. The feline eye is watching,